You cannot be a moral person and work within the banking industry. Yes, I said it. But I don't want to have people not watch this video just because of that statement, because I am going to explain why. So I plead with you, if you are an employee of the banking system and highly disagree with that statement, to at least have an open mind to watch this video in its entirety before you make any judgment about the statement I made, because I have very, very good reasons for having such a strong view. One of the most basic points we can talk about to illustrate the rampant immorality and the built-in actually immorality of the entire global banking system is the concept of fractional reserve banking. Because this very principle alone guarantees that there will be continued theft of the savings of every single human being on this planet through something we call inflation, which is a silent tax. So let me explain to you why that is. Now, when we look at that concept, we have to understand that everybody that's been educated through the institutional academic system, since it is funded by these money masters, by the very bankers that are defrauding us all, that we don't learn anything truthful, period, about the banking and monetary system, whether we just went through high school, whether we graduated from university, or whether we went on even got a master's in business administration or a PhD in economics. We are not learning the truth about what is going on because the bankers have dictated the curricula all over the world as far as what we are learning. So to begin with, we always learn in America that the reserve ratio requirement all banks is 10%. So in other words, if someone deposits $1 million, the bank has to keep at least 100,000 in a bank, so the multiplier is 10 times, right? So they can actually make 10 million in loans, create 9 million out of thin air, which already is devaluing everyone's savings. But that is not even close to the situation. It's a lot worse than it is. If you go Google Alfred Crozier and you look at the Aldrich Plan. This is over 100 years ago. He explains because the Aldrich Plan changed 100 years ago. The reserve ratio requirement that time deposits were not subject to any reserve ratio requirements, that the multiplier is actually 26 times. So here we are in the 21st century, business schools all over the world in the US are still lying to the people. And even Zeitgeist got this wrong, saying that the multiplier was only 10 times. So we're telling you 100 years ago, this is how criminal the bankers are. It was already 26 times 100 years ago. So in other words, out of $1 million deposit, a bank could have created 100 years ago $26 million. And it's even worse today. And there's stats on the St. Louis Fed's website that show that just as the bankers worked around the reserve ratio requirements back then, that there is something called money market deposit accounts that are subject to, you guessed it, 0% reserve ratio requirements. So already by the year 2000, more than 70% of all commercial banks in the US were subject to zero. You got it, not 10%, to zero reserve ratio requirements. So in essence, the bank multiplier could be 100 times. So if you can understand what that means, if you can understand that as a valid businessman, if you have a valid business model, that you cannot receive $1 million in revenues or even like say profits and multiply and then lend out $100 million and charge interest on that to just enrich yourselves while you are basically destroying the purchasing power of currency for everyone else by creating this fake money out of thin air and this fake credit, this fake debt out of thin air. So what is going on with this debt and credit system and the global monetary system? It is totally a false model that destroys valuation. So it perpetually puts people in poverty. And those that think about it, the US dollar has lost 98% of its value in just 100 years. So if you are one of the approximately 3.5 billion people in this world that only earn $2 a day or less, and you make $3 a day, you get a 50% increase in your salary, it doesn't even matter because the valuation, because most currencies for a long time have been pegged to the US dollar. If the US dollar is losing value, then so is whatever their domestic currency they're being paid in. So you can actually get poorer even getting a 50% raise in salary. So if you got a $2 to $3 raise, just to be even, to have the same purchasing power, you would have to be up to 100% to $4. So this is how the system perpetually keeps people in poverty. Poverty cannot be solved under this global banking system. So that is why the system is so fraudulent and so evil. Okay, let me just clarify one thing real quickly, because what I was trying to say is that even if the dollar is depreciating and your domestic currency is appreciating, so that it translates into a 50% increase in salary from $2 a day to $3 a day for someone dwelling in poverty. That translation of a 50% increase in nominal salary can actually lead to a worse quality of life, because what's going on now is all central banks are devaluing their domestic currencies into worthlessness. So it's a race to the bottom. So that is the point I wanted to make. Okay, let's move on now. So let's go on. Most people know today that the Federal Reserve is a private credit monopoly, and they understand that it's also an international cabal. So it's not an American cabal. This basically international cabal bankers are stealing and funneling money from Americans to all banking issuers all over the world. The Rothschilds are European. Warburg, who was another of the original shareholders of the Federal Reserve, was an immigrant that had to be naturalized, so he wasn't even born in America, and he's one of the shareholders. So when we look at this, and you have to understand that you're supporting an international criminal cabal. And then the next point I want to make is this whole notion of too big to fail, too big to jail. And that is ridiculous, because although on a very surface level, I told you how corrupt and how fraudulent the banking system is, and it's a systemic, widespread thing. The fact is that too big to jail means too powerful to jail, because who created this system? It didn't come. God did not create this system. Man created this system. So when we say too big to fail, too big to jail, we're talking about we don't want to jail these criminal bankers, these men. And when your bank is labeled as too big to jail, like HSBC, Citigroup, Bank of America, basically you're saying that these men are too powerful to jail. So when you're within that system, you realize the system is corrupt. Actually, your boss is a man. That's just one way of basically not taking responsibility for your actions by saying, oh, the system is corrupt, but man created that system. So the men that run these organizations are corrupt. These men ultimately are your bosses. This is ultimately who you're supporting, and this is ultimately who you're working for. So that's what you need to understand. Now, most corporations have something called like an 80-20 rule, where 20% of the executives make 80% of the income, and then the remaining lousy 20% of all the rest of the salaries and income are left for the 80% of people. I would think at banks, actually, that model is probably something like 95 to 5. So 5% of the executives take 95% of all the income of a bank, and then the other 95% of employees are left to fight over the scraps of the remaining 5%. So that is ridiculous. Why even be a worker bee? You're not even benefiting from the fraud. So that's another reason you should walk away, because the people at the top are keeping everything and you're not even benefiting. And do you think for a second that they care about you? Because they do not care about you. If you think they do, then you have just been brainwashed by some corporate propaganda campaign that they put out there. So, because look at all the layoffs. Does Citigroup care right now, or Bank of America, that they're laying off thousands of employees and now putting people in situations of dire struggle where they're not sure where the next meal is going to come from, not sure if they're going to be able to make their next mortgage payment, and perhaps have to sell their house or be even worse, be homeless. If you look at even the 2008 scandal, did these executives really stop taking their multi-million-dollar compensations? Did Stan O'Neill suffer? They said Merrill Lynch. Did the CEO, which I can't remember off the top of my head, of Bear Stearns suffer, or Dick Fall Lehman Brothers suffer. They said on average of these Wall Street firms, that these banks that collapsed, that on average these CEOs took 500 million, that's right, $500 million of salary and bonuses and other compensation in 10 years. And do they worry that the thousands of employees, when their firms collapse, are out of jobs? Do you think they care? They didn't give a damn that these people lost their jobs, because they didn't have to give back a single penny of all their ill-gotten gains that were basically gotten through illegal schemes that I've somewhat outlined. But if you want to really know the full story, I've written a book called The Golden Gift, and I'll put the link to it in the video description below, because I can't explain just the duplicity and the magnitude of these schemes in a short video. Now, let's review basically some of the facts of the criminal drug activities of banks, which HSBC has been called, Citigroup, Bank of America, American Express. I mean, there are too many to name. And in fact, the former UN drug czar Antonio Maria Costa said, he testified when HSBC was being investigated for money laundering for drug cartels in I believe it was June or July 2012. He said, I cannot think of one single bank. He said, I cannot think of one global bank that has not been infiltrated by the mafia. So meaning that they are all laundering dirty money. And in fact, he said during the liquidity crunch that happened earlier during part of this global economic crisis, he said that $325 billion of illicit money, primarily drug cartel money and then the rest organized crime and mafia money, saved the banks. Because he said that without this money, he said actually the liquidity crunch was brought about by a Sinaloa, a Mexican Sinaloa drug cartel, decided to stop laundering their money through the global banking system, and that caused a liquidity crunch. But the only money, he said, that was available, the rest of it, he said almost 100% of the cash money that was available in the entire global banking system, he said, was dirty. That's how widespread it is. So this is not an isolated incident. So I know there's going to be an element of you that are watching this video that work in the banking industry that say, well, whenever there is money, there's going to be an element of criminality, so there's nothing I can do about it, and that's ludicrous, I'm not going to quit banking. That is not what I'm saying. I am saying, and please do keep watching this video because I'm going to cover this point, that there were times when banking was operated, the platform it operated on was a sound system, and it operated on fundamentally moral principles versus the immoral principles it operates on today. So I'm saying it is fundamentally a system that is designed to hurt humanity. And so my plea to you to walk away from the system is really one about being humane to your fellow man, to your fellow woman, to your fellow children out there, and walk away from this industry because it hurts humanity. This platform, this global banking system was designed to enslave and control humanity, and it hurts humanity, and as part of that system you are hurting humanity. So the argument that you're going to use is not a valid one. If the banking system returned, if good people ran it, good people took over the global banking system, redesigned it, where it was a sound system that was used as a force of good to help the economy, to create jobs, then I would say, go ahead, be an employee. I have no problem with it. The problem is the fact that it's fundamentally an immoral system. So that is like working for a drug cartel and saying, if you're going to stay part of this system, and saying, well, people are going to buy drugs anyway, so I'm going to get my own. I'm going to make my profits. I'm going to make my billions. It doesn't matter. I'm not, even though people are dying, people are going to do it anyways. And that is the wrong way to look at this. My plea is for you to be humane when you think about whether or not it is moral to work for the banking industry. Okay, so with the global cocaine trade, it's estimated that the cocoa leaf producers, the poor peasants that are the farmers, earn about 1.3% of the profits. And then distributors, the international drug traffickers, I'm sorry, not the distributors, but the traffickers, get about 13%. And then the remaining 85% go to the distributors. So The global annual drug trade is about 380 billion a year. So 85% of that is 323 billion dollars a year that has to be laundered. That is the money that's being laundered through the global banking system. So if you look at HSBC, when 7 billion, you think 7 billion cash. This is not digital credits and debits that are flowing across international borders. This is cash. 7 billion in cash was sent to the U.S. branches of HSBC by the Mexican subsidiaries of HSBC. So you cannot tell me the CEOs don't know that this money is dirty money. And this is just the money that's being caught. Because I explained to you already, $323 billion of dirty money is flowing through the global banking system. So maybe HSBC laundered a lot more than 7 billion, and they only got caught with 7 billion. Citigroup, they had the account for the brother of ex-Mexican president Raul Salinas, and they said 9 figures in cash were flowing into his accounts, in cash. So do not tell me the executives do not know that this money is dirty. You cannot have that much cash flowing into an account without people questioning where it's coming from. 7 billion, come on, in 2 years, in just 2 years. So how about all the rest of the years that HSBC was not caught? This is just accounting for 2007 and 2008. So when you look at that, you can basically say that these banks are partners with the violent Mexican Sinaloa cartel. If you cannot see a link between banking, money laundering, which HSBC is doing, and the 60,000 murders that happen in the Mexican drug cartel, you cannot see that you are supporting, by being a bank employee, that you're supporting these murders and the continuation of these homicides, that something is wrong in your brain. You're not making the connection between the fact that these banks are basically partners, and you working as an employee for a bank, even though you're a low-level employee, or you might even be an executive, but you're unaware of it. But now I'm telling you, you are partners, so you might as well have been working for Pablo Escobar. You might as well have, at the height of his cocaine empire, you might as well, you can consider yourself an employee right now. El Chapo Guzman, who was violent drug lord of the Sinaloa Mexican drug cartel, because you are in bed with these guys and spreading misery and murder and homicide. And I already explained to you how the banking system perpetuates poverty. The banking system also perpetuates war, because the bankers profit off of war. Whenever you have war appropriations, who do you think is giving that money to the government to go to war? The war appropriations come from the banks, and they do not give that money debt-free. There's an interest component with that. So the longer bankers have a vested interest, I'm not saying, although people have accused certain banks of instigating wars and creating false flag events to instigate war so they can profit from it. I'm not going to go that far, but it is an indisputable fact that banks profit from war, and they have a vested interest in seeing war go on, because as long as war goes on, as long as there's multi-trillion dollars in war appropriations, then they will continue to receive those interest payments. And how do basically the central banks pay the? How do the interest payments on that the war appropriations get paid? Basically, the central banks go to the government and say, levy an income tax. So the federal income tax, that is why Ronald Reagan said the federal income tax is wholly un-American. If you don't understand that, if you are one of those people that say, oh, if you're not willing to pay your income tax, get out of our country, you are a moron, because you don't understand what the purpose of those income taxes are. And you need to go to Google and find out why Reagan said that income tax is a wholly un-American idea and should be totally banned. So you have to understand these concepts. You have to understand what you're taught in school is not the truth, because I'm telling you, I'm laying down the truth for you now so you understand. So you may ask yourself, how can this be, right? I know there's going to be a lot of you watching this. I already know this, because these are indisputable facts. It's not my opinion. So I'm going to put, again, check the video description below in this YouTube video, and you will discover that do your own research. I always say that in all my videos. Don't just believe what I'm saying. So do your own research. You're going to find out that these are facts. But formulate your own opinion after doing your own research. But how does this happen, right? Because you may say, I've been working in the banking industry, and yeah, I've heard kind of like here and there, but I didn't realize it was so widespread and that the whole business model is a criminal business model of the global banking system today. Well, this is how it happens. It's through a concept called compartmentalization. And the Manhattan Project, which was the project to build the world's first atomic bomb, at its peak in 1945 employed over 130,000 people, yet the majority of those people had no idea that they were working on a project to build the atomic bomb. So how does this work? Well, compartmentalization is basically everyone's giving an individual task so they don't understand, but they're not given any information about all the other separate tasks people are working on. So it's kind of like an impressionist painting. If you look at it closely, all you see are little dots, right? But then when you step back, you see the wider picture and the whole painting, and it all makes sense. But people never see the wider picture. And that's what banks do to keep the worker bees working. They basically, it's on a need-to-know basis. It's basically your pay grade is not high enough to know what the executives at the top 5% of the bank know. So no one knows. But the information is out there. That's how they keep the worker bees working. And the worker bees believing that they are fine and working for a moral industry when they're basically just working for a legalized criminal racket. So this is a choice you will have to make once you know this information, because once you're aware, you realize you're working for a criminal racket. You either cease being moral and keep working for these criminals and keep supporting, indirectly supporting like misery and murder through these drug cartels and these organized crime cartels, and keep supporting the sustained poverty levels globally, keep indirectly supporting the perpetuation of unnecessary wars, including the war on drugs, which is an unnecessary war. So, because that's all about profits, but that's a whole nother topic for another time. So you either cease being moral and you stay within and be a cog in the machine, or you decide to be moral and walk away from the industry. So it is a question of choice. It is a question of whether you want to understand the immorality. So at the very least, I know that I left the banking system when I felt in my heart something was extremely wrong with, extremely immoral about the banking system, and that I, as a human being, cannot continue to sow destruction upon my other fellow human beings. So I did the research and I found out why, because there was a nagging feeling that something was highly immoral about the banking industry. So for people that want to claim ignorance, I am going to put in the link below 3 videos and 1 book that you can read that will inform you why banking is an immoral industry. So if you choose not to view these videos, if you choose not to read this book, then it is on you. You are deliberately choosing to be ignorant so you can claim that you are unaware of the rampant immorality of the banking system, of the rampant immorality of the global monetary system, and continue to work in the system. So that's the main point I want to make. First of all, is that a lot of people say that's a crazy argument, but if you know the facts, because we are not given the facts, because the bankers control the mass media. In the U.S., it's the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg people that are all members of the mass media, so they're not disseminating truth to you. So, but the truth is out there if you want to know, if you have the incentive and initiative to learn. And I feel if you are an employee of the banking system, it is your imperative to serve humanity by knowing what the truth is, and it is a conscious decision, and ignorance is no longer excuse. The banking system or your bank does commit a lot of fraud and criminality, so you support it by remaining an employee of that bank, because as I stated before, the queen bee will die. The concept of fraud as a business model for banks today will die if you quit, even if you're an auxiliary member that does not directly participate in this fraud. By continue to be a worker bee, you continue to feed the queen bee, because the queen bee cannot exist without all the worker bees. For small community banks, that say, hey, we're not Citigroup, we're not HSBC, so I can continue to work for these banks and be a moral person. That also is an argument without logic, because the whole global monetary system, every bank that participates in the fractional reserve lending system is hurting people, is defrauding people, is putting people in debt immorally. So you cannot say that because you're not part of these huge global banks that have been outed in the media for committing massive fraud, that you are not hurting people. Here's the point I also want to make. Banking does not have to be an immoral craft. It's just that the bankers, like the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, the JP Morgans, the Rockefellers, that took over and commandeered this banking system and formulated it as an immoral system. So the last point bank in history that I could find through my research that I think offered a moral business model was the Municipal Bank of Amsterdam, but this was in the late 1600s to early 1700s. So granted, that was more than 400 years ago that we had a moral banking system. So if banking returns to a moral, upstanding, above board, sound system, then you can work in the banking system and be a moral person. But you cannot be a moral person and support an absolutely utterly immoral system that hurts so many people in this world. And I would even say bankers do more harm than even Pol Pot, than Hitler. And the reason for that, obviously Pol Pot and Hitler committed atrocities of like unbearable and unspeakable atrocities against humanity that bankers have not committed. But even though these atrocities were in the hundreds of thousands and in the millions of people and committed millions of deaths, you can say that the impact and the scope of banking immorality is far greater than anything Pol Pot, anything Mussolini, anything Hitler could do, because it affects 6.8 billion people, affects every man, woman, and child on this planet. So the scope of the immorality is far greater. So if you look at the social impact of the immorality of the banking system and the monetary system, then it is far greater than the most evil of evil dictators in the history of this world. So in conclusion, banking used to be a principled, moral system that used sound money. But when the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Warburgs, the JP Morgans, etc., overtook the system, they transformed it into an immoral system that is destructive to all of humanity. So I hope that given this information today, if you are a bank employee, that you really give strong consideration, although I know it's an extremely difficult decision to walk away from the industry because of the financial implications. But I did it 6 years ago too, and I introduced all that uncertainty into my life to do it. So I beg of you to also consider that, making the moral choice to walk away from the industry. And if you have not, or you're not in the banking industry, but you're watching this and you have friends in the banking industry, I also urge you to pass this on so they can also consider this and think about it. So please let me know what you think. If you agree, please give a thumbs up. Please also comment below. Tell me, do you disagree with my point? Do you think I'm being too harsh? Or do you agree with my viewpoints? I love to hear your comments below. Thanks for watching and have a great day. So long.